I was going to do a much more formal introduction than women shut up, but that will pass. I think maybe the introduction or Betsy's introduction gives us an indication of what we can expect from her talk. So I think we've got a lot to look forward to. But on behalf of the Australian Domestic and Family Violence Clearinghouse, I'd like to welcome you today. It's just fantastic to see so many people here, and I think it's indicative of the groundswell of interest in bringing about some change in New South Wales. And I think we've got a fantastic speaker here today to tell us about some things that we could do and some things that have been done. I think I'll leave Betsy to background some of her career herself, because I know that she's planning to do that. But I'm sure all of us sitting here today have in some way heard of her or read some of her papers and have heard about her more recent work with the Metropolitan Police. And I think that that's what she's largely going to be focusing on today. Before we actually get started, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're on Aboriginal land and to acknowledge the elders past and present. And for the Clearinghouse, that's always a really important issue for us, because one of our key areas of interest is in violence against Aboriginal women and children, and that's certainly a constant thought in our minds. Did I have anything else to say? No? I think with that I'll just hand you over to Betsy. Thank you. Oh, I never said who I was, by the way. I'm actually Gabby Marcus. I'm the director of the Clearinghouse. I was a bit upstaged by the shut up women. Yep, I think that's it. Over to you.
I'll move this just slightly. Can everybody hear me? I'm still only been in the country for 6 days and managed to land on Friday, and by Sunday night caught the flu. So I'm still a bit spaced, but I'm beginning to recover again. So there's a bit of a feedback on one of these mics. I'm not sure. It might be that one. If that one could be turned off, that would stop the feedback. I'm not the terribly technical person, but that just might help your ability to, unless I stand way back here, which might be a bad thing. Let me give you a little background about who I am and why I was so reluctant to come and speak to you today. I'm supposed to be on recovery duty. Part of my new job at the Metropolitan Police is that when you get to fly halfway around the world, you actually have a risk assessment that you have to fill out. And I have 3 risk assessment forms that I fill out to fly. One of which makes sure that I have to drink enough water and that I don't drink alcohol on the plane. And I flew with Singapore Air, so they really serve very bad wine, so you're not going to be drinking too much of that anyway. And so I was, there we go, they've turned that one off. So after my risk assessments, I get recovery duty from so I'm actually officially now on my recovery duty. I'm supposed to be lolling at a beach somewhere or putting my feet up and walking in the mountains, which I will do sometime next week, before I get on a plane and do the other 24-hour murder on the way back. So there's nothing you can do, I've learned, to minimize the hammering of 24 hours in an airplane, really, except catch the flu, and then it makes it much more exciting. In my first life, I was an academic, and still have an affiliation at Royal Holloway, and that's where the professor stuff comes from. My work was on violence against women. You'd probably say, why is she saying this? Because 6 years ago, I left academic life after running the UK's violence research program to change the world, change the UK government. I went to work for a guy named Tony Blair in a think tank on public service reform. I became a civil servant doing public sector reform. And my remit initially was working with DEFRA and got to do an analysis of social policy around birds and fish and pet passports and things like that. But then I moved to doing citizen-focused policing. Now, when you do work on citizen-focused policing, it seems pretty, after doing work on violence against women for 25 years, it's a perfect fit. What is citizen-focused policing? It's policing through the eyes of the people who receive it. It's very simple. How does it feel to receive policing services? What does it mean? And in terms of the work that we've been doing on violence against women for 30 years, it fits perfectly. Because what do we know? What do women want? They want to be listened to. They want to be treated with respect. They want somebody to validate what they tell them. They want to be taken seriously. And they want your time. Perfect. Citizen-focused policing. That was my remit. However, after 15 months, I thought pushing forward some of the central government work around citizen focus, you need to make sure that it happens. And after Mr. Blair went to war, I thought actually it wasn't a very good thing for me to work for somebody who went to war, so I resigned. First time in my life I ever resigned from a job when I didn't have another one. Woo, scary. And I wrote to another Blair, a guy named Ian Blair, who happens to be the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police at the time. And Ian and I had worked together on rape and sexual assault 25 years ago, and said to Ian, "Hi, I'm available. Would you like me to come and work with you?" And lo and behold, he said yes. So I went into the Metropolitan Police Service. I am a fully non-sworn member of the Metropolitan Police Service, but I am a member of the Metropolitan Police Service, working together for a safer London. And I am something called the Senior Advisor for Strategic Analysis. My remit is not just violence, although I work largely on violence, and I work on performance and strategy and crime analysis. And I work in between the worlds of intelligence and information. And again, it all fits perfectly with the work I've been doing, although for the scary but true for those who know of me as a qualitative criminologist, I do lots of statistics at the moment. Boy, would that scare you. And you know what I'm finding with my statistics? Everything we've been saying for years. Everything we've been saying for years is in the information base of the police service I work for. So for all those years that I worked on silence, I now work on what people tell us. And the difference is that what people tell us is pretty much what people don't. It sounds the same to me. So I start with a premise. My premise in terms of public service ethos is that I turn it around completely. Because one of the things I think that we've done in terms of public services is we've designed our public services for a middle-class woman who has no children. So when I start talking about public services, this is my model. The messiest, hardest case that you've got, and if you can do it, if you can set up a responsive police service for a woman who speaks no English, who's got 5 kids, and has no right to be in the country, you are delivering a gold star service. You can do it. Not that you have to house her and all those kinds of things, but if you know where the links are to help her, then you've got gold star service. You've done it. You're in nirvana, although I haven't been to nirvana yet. And we're not there. I'm not here to say that what we do in the Metropolitan Police is perfect. I am not here from the UK with a North American accent. Even despite my flu, you might have tried to figure out where the hell is this woman from. I'm not here to tell you that we do it perfectly, and I'm not here to tell you that I have the magic. But I am here to say that you can bloody well get it better. And the way you do it is from simple premises. And part of today is just kind of telling a story, and that's why I was kind of kicked up the backside by Gabby saying, "No, really, we want you to come and speak." "Oh, no, I don't want to come and speak. I don't really have anything to say." But I guess I do have lots to say, particularly since I know from the last 4 years inside the Metropolitan Police Service that everything that we were saying for the 25 years outside the police service is true. So take heart. Inside the police service, they know the same thing you do. They just don't understand their data as well. And I'll talk about that later. So I asked some of my friends before I left the UK, what did we think actually made a big difference in terms of domestic violence and in terms of violence against women, because I will end this presentation on a piece of work I've just completed on an end-to-end review of rape in London. And it's quite clear that actually the naming has had a very powerful effect. Feminist voices, feminist activism actually brought violence against women to the forefront. And as much as you may feel exhausted by that, in terms of the fact that you may be floundering a bit or feeling like we're floundering a bit in New South Wales or elsewhere in Australia, having that naming bit seemed to be quite a significant thing. It does make a difference. And actually, what you do with the naming is, and the reason why I work with the public sector is because I'm a public servant, but also it's the public sector. It's the police service still that is your 24/7. They're going to be an important resource, not the answer, a resource for somebody in trouble. Public service is a resource. It's not a solution. And you're paying for it. You're paying your taxes to build that 9-foot wall. I thought it was for me. I was really pleased. I thought, oh my God, I'm causing that much trouble? No, it's actually my president. I do travel on my UK passport, so. The next thing we did was we harnessed the tools of social science. We have evidence, and evidence is actually quite an important thing. And what I'm suggesting to you is that all of those victimization surveys that we know, you don't need to keep doing them, because strange but true, they keep coming up with the same numbers. I don't know why. 1 in 4 women experience domestic violence in their lifetimes, and you'll see some of that in the beginning. And then, in many ways, the demand for protection, which was, and I'm going to say, keep it simple. What do I do now in terms of my contribution to policing in the Metropolitan Police? My contribution is to prevent death. That's why I do my work, because my work helps prevent death. And in terms of, working together for a safer London, I make it even more focused than that. I'm interested in preventing death. And when you get that, when you begin to think of preventing the worst, that has a cascade effect, and I'll talk more about that later. So one of the things that I've learned over the 30 years is to be really simple about the kinds of goals and focus that you can agree on, because I don't know how many times, Robin, how many times we've been in a room when you were going to define domestic violence. It took 25 years to define domestic violence. Don't give me another definition. Because the more we wait and define and cut and say this is that and that is that, somebody else dies. Why are we spending so much time trying to define things when actually the worst stuff is really clear to me? Death clarifies what it is that we're trying to do. And if you're trying to prevent death, then what you're trying to do is identify risk. So we know that domestic violence does lots of different things. It's largely the kind of violence affecting women. It has many different forms. It's psychological, it's physical, it's economic. And again, our research in England, which you can redo it here, but these numbers still keep coming up again. That 1 in 9 and 10 of women experience some form of domestic violence in their lifetime, in any 1 year, and 1 in 4 and 1 in 7 in any one lifetime. And yes, it's true that men are victims of domestic violence, but, and I keep having to go, but, we know, and again, the evidence tells us, go to any hospital, go to your homicide registers, that it's more injurious. Not only that, And this is the thing. I go inside the Metropolitan Police. I can get this data. I can get crime data to stand up, whistle, do all kinds of things. I can now analyze our crime data like a social science database. In London alone, big city, metropolitan area, millions of people, strangers walking about. 75, 3 out of 4 women who contact the Metropolitan Police for help do so when they know the assailants. Again, resource model in terms of public service. Why do people contact public services? Because they need help. Not that they want to know. Sometimes they call it for the time of day. That's true. You get all kinds of calls when you're in the police service. But actually, it's because they want help and assistance. And in London, not some, small town somewhere, big city, major city, global city, 75% of the women who need help from the police around violence do so because they know the person who's hurting them. That's a lot. So if you know your business, you get your act together. If we were, what's a big grocery store here? Is Tesco's here? Who is it? Woolworths. Ooh. Different one. Okay. Well, just think, if you were Woolworths and you were interested in moving produce around, because you were in charge of buying, and you sent all your carrots up to Cairns and all your courgettes down to Melbourne, and yet all your people who needed courgettes lived in Melbourne. Bad idea, huh? You can't do deployment, you can't do buying properly, you can't, what kind of business model is that? If you're a public service, you are actually providing a business. One of your businesses is to know what your business is. One of our businesses is dealing with violence against women by known men. Big part of our business. Particularly if you're interested in working together for a safer London. And what do you do to work together for a safer London? You reduce violence. It's part of my job. I do love my job. I absolutely love my job. Not that it's not without fights, and I'll talk about those later. Okay, so we know commonly we know, and that's, again, you can do all the work you want. You can go to any country you want, but you won't find anything that's going to contradict these findings. Abuse, sexual harassment, rape, battering, they're still common features in women's lives. We know that the estimated costs in our country are $23 billion, and you've got a cost, and I'm not going to reproduce your thing, but again, use it. And fortunately, with Gordon Brown, he knows about costs. He's an economist. Thank goodness for that. I mean, and actually, if you want an efficient public service that's being paid for out of my pocket, you go for where the problems are. One of the other things I do in terms of the analysis in the Metropolitan Police is not just violence against women, but I go for pockets of, where the worst crime is. So I can now map it. I've got 624 wards in London, and I put out an award ceremony. Congratulations, Borough Commander. You have one of the worst wards in London. Congratulations. You're going to have to do something about that. They don't like me. They do like me, actually. But I do things like that. I do send them a little, congratulations, Borough Commander. Now, interestingly enough, can we have any impact? Does it make any difference? The British Crime Survey, I'm not going to stand up and say we've reduced domestic violence by 59% since 1995. It may be that the population of people that's interviewed, but there has been an incident drop in domestic violence. And we're picking that up across the country. Now, that doesn't mean that police reports are not up, because part of government policy is to increase police reports to police, right? You want police to be a resource. So that's good news. It's taken 10 years to get that understanding of an increase in violence is good news. as long as you know what it's about. And again, I can do the separation. I do an analysis of here's the trend for violence, here's the trend for domestic violence, here's the trend for alcohol-related violence. What is driving the increase in violence in London is alcohol-related violence, and I can even tell you where and probably on which street. So enabling the police to focus on where the problems are and exactly what the problem is and at what time enables the resource to be more efficiently harnessed. It's strange, right? You suddenly hear me speaking like I'm a business person, but actually, in terms of running a public service, it's really important to harness a language that actually is going to deliver what you need to have delivered, which is about, good service to violence against women. In London as well, over the past 7 years, in 7 years, domestic homicide has been reduced by half. Now, how did this happen? How did it happen? How did we possibly do that? And it's not just a police service that deserves the credit. It is a London-wide effort. It's a whole city effort. Or as I heard people say, whole government effort. It's not just policing that's going to do this. It's a whole effort. What are we still missing? Well, in one of the things that we need to still be reminded of is actually gender matters. Women and girls are still vulnerable to abuse, and particularly familiar abuse. And that one of the things that's enabled me to move forward is constantly reviewing how we see and identify domestic violence in our everyday work. And I'm going to give you a series of little tricks that I used over time to kind of help prick the consciousness of government to move forward in different kinds of ways. And these are little devices that you might want to use here as well. And it's just some, again, premises. And when I get too long, you just have to remind me. And it is about visibility. Because if we assume that naming has been successful, well, next is about visibility. So I'm now suggesting that, and I hear it all the time. Most domestic violence is not reported. A woman is beaten 35 times before she contacts the police. Although, by the way, that number was made up by researchers in the 70s. I don't even think it's empirically based. I come in now with a different thing. I think we see, and we've always seen, violence. We just have chosen not to see it. When I was a director of the Violence Research Program, we had 20 projects around the United Kingdom, and there were projects looking at violence in prison and punishment beatings in Northern Ireland. I mean, in Northern Ireland, for example, punishment beatings were often meted out by appointment. Now, that meant that a woman would bring her son to a street corner to have his knees shot off. Now, if you think about that as a phenomena, I mean, it's just like, what? What did she, excuse me, can I just rewind that a bit? Punishment beatings punishment beatings are punishment, physical punishment meted out generally by the paramilitary groups to usually petty criminals and often juveniles who lived in the neighborhoods that were controlled by the paramilitary groups as an alternative form of policing. Punishment beatings were meted out in exchange for or as a lever, because the other alternative was to leave the province. So you could leave Northern Ireland, or you could have your knees shot off. The hospitals had plenty of information about about punishment beatings. Was there any database in this conflict on punishment beatings? None. Zippo. Zero. And yet, it was constantly being reported in the newspapers. It was constantly being discussed and debated. The surgeons were putting people's bits back together again. How could we say that we didn't know? Prison violence, same kind of thing. Of course we know about prison violence. We have full protocols about what happens when people get into fights and what do you do and whether or not they get criminal sanctions and da-da-da-da-da-da. How could we not know that violence in prison isn't a major way in which people are controlled? How can you not know that? We know it. Where's the database? Where's the evidence? Who's subjected to this kind of violence and what's the impact? Domestic violence in pregnancy. School violence, homophobic harassment, one after another after another. And what do we know about these things? Well, everybody knows about them. Where's the database? Right? Some poor researcher walking along with a little access database and a computer, trying to count, when everybody's public records are strewn with this stuff. Absolutely strewn with this stuff. The hospitals have records on blood, guts, and how many limbs are taken off, and how many babies die, and how many kids get excluded because of violence, and what kind of violence, and what teachers are subjected to it. You know how much information we have on violence? We have hordes of information on violence. You know how much stuff is in police records? Oh my God, I'm in a gold mine. I'm like a pig with candy. I've got so much information, and I'm producing it. One report after another. So the excuse is not that we didn't know. The excuse is that we did nothing when we knew it. Nearly all acts of violence that we found in the violence program were witnessed by or directly known about by some third party. Somebody knows. Most violence, and again with all the, the kind of debates, how many debates do we have? Is it really physical? Does it make a difference? Yeah, of course. Most violence is verbal abuse, and absolutely it makes a difference. It undermines people's sense of well-being. It's humiliating. It goes right to the heart of who the person is. And we know that from all different kinds of violence. That is part of the lesson of the violence research program. And it's not just domestic violence that tells us this. It's punishment violence, punishment beatings, it's racist harassment, all of the kinds of things. Violence does tell a story. Violence against women is one part of that. But it tells a story. And those stories exist in our records. We know that insults, abuse, comments, and threats draw upon knowable what everybody, this is my one academic term in there, social capital, as resources of abuse. So, racist comments, perfect resource of abuse, because you're going for, a form of power, which is going to really piss somebody off or really hurt. And certainly in the UK at the moment, with the kinds of heightened concern and awareness and the Islamophobia that's going on, there's all kinds of things that are happening in terms of the kinds of social capital that's being used and harnessed against a whole variety of people, by ordinary people, because they know that's the piece of social capital to use against somebody else. Racism, homophobia, violence against women, then, is purposeful, it's targeted, and it's often spatially grounded. So I'm doing analysis around all kinds of different violence because I'm looking at spaces as well. From a conversation I had with Victoria Police, they were very envious about my gazetteer. Isn't that geeky to talk about gazetteers? What's a gazetteer? A gazetteer would give me a geographical location of a particular incident. London, we now have but over 90% of our incidents are geographically reasonably accurate. So then I can start, again, pinpointing places where people ask for help. Okay. Now, using that as kind of the theoretical background, my academic life again. If you put that understanding of violence inside the kind of specialist services, and a lot of what's gone on in the UK has not gone on without the efforts of so many people across so many different sectors. I mean, we got people in now, although education is still a bit far behind still, and health is kind of just kind of catching up. But issues around how do you think about the variety of services that anybody who deals with, and again, domestic violence, but any kind of violence really, needs in terms of public services. So you need a joined-up whole systems approach because somebody comes into a system at different places. What we know about domestic violence provision, for example, in the UK is that 20%, well, the same number, a proportion of women who contact police contact health. Health has been so slow to the table. You know, they sort of find the seat and then they sit down and then they don't come for a number of months. I'm sure you don't have that problem here. But multi-agency forums, there are now multi-agency risk assessment panels. Again, by no means are these straight across the board. And again, we'll talk about, what do you do when you have different risk models? And I understand that, but go back up. What are we trying to do? We're trying to prevent death. Please, please, please don't get bureaucratic and definitional about risk assessments and anal about it, because if you do, you're going to miss the major intersecting points. Where is it that people who do help and service provision in the voluntary sector, where are their neon lights? And why are their neon lights different than the police lights? Well, they might be different, but what you have to do is trust your neon lights. So it's not about getting the definition right, it's about bloody trust, frankly, if you want my honest opinion. We need primary prevention, again, schools and health. If you begin to think about violence in a different kind of way that will enable you to overcome some of the barriers around definitions and sectors and territory. Because what you really have, a lot of the problems that were going on, I think, in the UK were around territory and space and trust. And with committed people, just get over it, get over the trust. Let people do their jobs really well and find ways of holding each other to account for the high risk they do put on the table, actually. Because otherwise, you can just get on with your job. You don't need to involve them in decision-makings on level 2 or level 3. Sorry. If level... Just done a police thing. Oops. Wrong language. Level 1, level 2, level 3 is the way we think. In the police service, we talk about levels of crime. Actually, level 3 is the most serious. Your cross-border international stuff. Level 2 is sort of your organized crime, nasty guys. And level 1 is your local stuff. If we're thinking about the prevention of death as a level 3 thing, and where levels 1 and 2 are worked out in conjunction and maybe some bilaterals, don't get involved in definitional wars. It's not worth it because people then aren't getting help. So some of the real innovation, I think, and what's really pushed the England and Wales work forward is that there are specialist service in public services and a whole variety of them. They're all different and they're not perfect and they're not all joined up in every jurisdiction. So I'm not saying nirvana is here. These are part of the formulas of better success. Multi-agency forums, primary prevention work, repeat victimization. Again, somebody is reaching out for help because they need help. repeated use doesn't necessarily mean a woman's ready to leave a man. And there was some interesting research that I heard over the weekend or earlier this week that suggested that those who are more reluctant to harness the law enforcement part of domestic violence are those who are currently in the relationship. Well, we know that, but now we know it a bit more. Well, that makes a difference. So understanding diversity and silences of victims is really, really important. And there are many, and they're varied and they're wide, emotional, social, and cultural differences. One of the major impacts in the UK in the past 3 years in particular has been the Eastern European migration. We can't even, my data system isn't even harnessed properly to pick that up because they're under white other. That's not very good. So what if I need to know that I need much more work with Polish women and Romanian women and Russian women and, white other doesn't make it. Doesn't do it. Religion, Catholic, that doesn't help. I mean, no offense, but... the kinds of categories that exist then suddenly have become less useful, and we're going to have to adapt very quickly to begin to pick up, what are the changing demands and needs, again, of the service users, because service provision has changed dramatically overnight. I lived in a neighborhood where the first day there were hundreds of Polish people walking down the street on the 1st of May, 2006 or something, and giggling, saying, yeah, we're here. It was phenomenal. Hammersmith, 300,000 Polish people within 2 years. So I'm now picking up in my crime records, and we're picking up in terms of police services, people who don't speak as proper English as well as you would need, perhaps, but suddenly they're Polish women, not African women. So the diversity changes and changes very rapidly. Okay, what's my suggestion for a strategic approach? Well, I'm going for reducing death. That's my first, and some of the work that I worked on initially in the London Metropolitan Police 7 years ago was the kind of seeds of the work that set up the domestic homicide reviews. There's quite a lot of learning you can pick up from homicide reviews. I understand there's a bit of a reluctance to do that here, but you learn a lot, and you're going to have to. Independent support and advice, absolutely. You need to make sure that women have independent support and advice. It's important in terms of it's not just ones that's confined to the space. Early and multi-agency intervention begin to work a seamless response. Well, when we get seamless, I can retire, but it's an approach. It's something that you're aspiring to. It's aspirational. A joined-up criminal justice response. Lordy, make me, please. And then we'll talk about the kinds of things around domestic violence courts. What we're doing is we're creating all kinds of little boxes because not one of them is right. So what we do is we build another box and we put it over here. And then we build another box and we put it over here. And then we build another box and we put it over here. Citizen-focused policing means that you build the boxes around the citizen. You don't build it around the service. So you build the box according to what she needs, not around what the organization needs in order to keep going. And I was very pleased to be required to participate in the writing. Not required, but I was asked to make sure, the commissioner made sure that I was involved in the writing of the lack of tolerance that we as the Metropolitan Police Service will have for violence in our own ranks. Very interesting experience, actually. Very interesting experience for me. Because I ended up explaining to the specialist in corruption policing why it was important to make sure that if they indeed had an officer who was already under surveillance for other things, that actually they needed to tell his partner, if he was also a domestic violence assailant, that actually those two things together made him even more dangerous. Oh, well, we don't want to jeopardize our... there's a possibility that we might jeopardize our investigation. Well, we got over that, but you need to talk through why it might be that there might be some concern about an approach which also challenges the basic ways that an organization thinks about its own work. And that's part of what happened as well. Okay, some tricks, right? You think, oh, God, we need some tricks. We need some tricks. I had a fun one. One of the ones that I really enjoyed was my data count. But I had the cooperation of the London Metropolitan Police and every other police service in the UK. I did, on one day, counted how many domestic violence calls they had, and I asked the refuges to count how many women and children they had housed on that same day. I asked victim support to count how many victim support liaison and reach-outs they had on that same day. And we also got, because I just went to some cocktail party and ended up signing up somebody else, these are the things that happened to me, Relate, which is the counseling service for marriage guidance, also counted how many of their counseling sessions on that particular day mentioned domestic violence. It was a great little piece of work. It cost no money whatsoever, and it ended up getting front headlines. We were in story number 2 for the full day, and it showed, and it is those kinds of wonderful little points. That is, the police in the UK get a call for domestic violence once every minute. Once you have that, it's just a reminder that actually it is in your face. And one of the other things that we found was there were more women and children in refuges than called the police on that day. Now, that was a real shocker for them. And I said, well, you know what? Refuges are really crime prevention agencies. Relate found that 1 in 4 of their counseling sessions mentioned domestic violence. So what you do is you find out that the work is in your lap. It's in your records. Once again, when I said before, we're all doing this stuff. We're just not acknowledging it. We're not acknowledging what the power that has in terms of our daily work. So that if we work better together, perhaps we could find a way of actually surrounding the people who need the help rather than all the kinds of, we're reproducing each other's work on a daily basis because many victims go from place to place to place to place to place to find somebody they can talk to. So it was a nice little trick, and actually it's constantly used, and constantly it can be used as a grassroots thing. You can do it in Sydney. You can harness your local agencies. It doesn't cost anything. All you need is a fax machine or a email, and you just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I had people coming with bar graphs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I counted it. But when you put them again statistically against your common number, it's very, very, very powerful. Very powerful. And it reminds all of your leaders that the issue's in their lap. It's costing them money. Again, these things cost money. Cost your time, but also cost your money. And that means that if you brigade your money more effectively, you actually give better service. You make women's lives better. That's what this is about. Making women's lives better. So it's a tool for local awareness. It's a tool for local action. It was quite fun. There was a lot of government commitment, and I know there's a bit of wobbling going on your level. How am I doing? I'm going to go a couple more minutes. I'll go a bit faster. And all I can say is in terms of government commitment, as much as I might have had trouble with the last Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister is also quite heavily committed, and the new Deputy Prime Minister, who is our first woman Deputy Prime Minister, her number 2 priority is violence against women. It's right here. It's actually in writing, out for consultation. So you can go on the website, you can check it out. Our Deputy Prime Minister, we are now, it's a priority. Okay, now, that doesn't mean that everything is honky-dory and wonderful, and this is the one I had to get special permission to ask to present to you here, and that is I did an end-to-end review of of rape in London. I tracked 677 allegations of rape for 2 months in the first 2 months of the financial year of 2005 through the entire criminal justice system. But the reason why I bring it here is because of the links between domestic violence and rape. 1 in 5 of all allegations involving rape in London reported to police involves domestic violence. Now, 1 in 5. But the thing that I learned about rape as well is that 87% of the rape allegations reported to the police in London involve a vulnerability in addition to the rape. So you're either under 18, you experience domestic violence, you have a mental health issue, or it's an alcohol-related rape. And I consider alcohol-related rape a vulnerability, not a mitigating factor. Which means, again, the comment I started in the beginning, know your business. This fact has changed the way sexual assault is going to be investigated in London. Because you have to assume vulnerability rather than not. Now that makes such a difference in the way you approach a case. But we still have a great challenge. And I think, actually, across the entire world, one of the major scandals that still exists is in the area of sexual assault. To me, and this dovetails with domestic violence, absolutely, that the key obstacle to investigation and prosecution of rape is in women's accounts of forced sexuality. We still don't believe them. We don't believe. The outcome of the cases, the 677 allegations, is a conviction rate of 5.3%. If you take out the not crimes, a conviction rate of 7.9%. If you look only at the charged cases, it's a conviction rate of 1 in 3. So we don't even make the public prosecution's 50% rule. In order to take on a case, you have to assume that you're going to have a 50% chance. So what happens is in rape cases that most of the time you don't even have a chance. So that there's a presumption of that you have to reach above it. And actually now what I'm arguing is that maybe that rule shouldn't even be applied to sexual assault. It's an interesting, we have had, I can say, quite interesting, vigorous, and heated debates about this within my own service. But I have learned some things about policing, and I can say that I think there are some interesting things that are useful in terms of using policing as an example of best practice, because it is possible to use policing as best practice because they are still one of the few resources. So when you get it right, you really get it right because it's really necessary, particularly when you're on to prevent death. And what we know from the recent IPCC review of domestic homicides is that actually it's the basics that need to be right. It's not the bloody definition, with respect. It's the basics. Is you need to treat the victim sympathetically, that you need some kind of accurate organizational record that enables you to say, yes, this is a case that is serious, and that you offer that record as a legacy for protection. And that supervision itself is part of that protective mechanism. because you make your officers account for the way they handle people. Those are the three basics, and it has nothing to do with definition. So what do I think I can offer you as a kind of sense of inspiration? Yes, you need to get your leadership right. Absolutely. But I know from my experience that many of you already have information at your hands that can help. You're already sitting on information. Many of the records of your public services could and should be held to account. I don't know how you use freedom of information, but boy, I'd be harnessing it right, left, and center. And again, I'm in a different country, but I would ask, one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing is because transparency is absolutely key. Knowing what goes on, how it goes on, who's affected is really critical. We know that people are different. We know that diversity is absolutely critical. But actually, with respect, serious violence is serious violence. GBH and above is GBH and above. Treat it that way. When I did the first performance framework and asked how many, do we have 100% arrest rate for GBH and above in London, the answer is no. But I can tell you which boroughs, and I can tell you which borough commanders we have to talk to in order to get it. We can find patterns of harm, and we can use those patterns of harm to, again, think about and mirror our own offering of resources and go for the places where they might not be offered at the moment. Again, my example of the influx of Eastern European people into the UK means that we really have to adapt quite quickly. We're just about to build the Olympics site. We have 30,000 men moving in to the Olympic site, many of them from Eastern European countries. That means that we need to understand as much as we possibly can about what's going to be going on. I think we can probe known information, encourage consultation and dialogue, again, to discover the silences based on, again, what you know. Because if you look at what you know, you can then look at what you don't know. And I'm going to stop now. And I think, really, I am now very pleased that I was less reluctant to come here. I do apologize for being so reluctant to speak to you, because I think he needed to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. I think that was really amazing to have those things that, as you say, we do know, pointed out to us so succinctly. And I think the thing is we all know them individually. We all need to know them together and work together to put all of our shared knowledge into your aim, preventing death. Because I think that's what we're all here for, is because we want to make it better. And if we can go away from today with some pointers on how to do that and with some renewed energy, I think that'll be fantastic. What I do just want to say is, in terms of some of the questions that have come up here today, the Clearinghouse has got a paper coming out in the next couple of months on homicide review teams. That'll come out to subscribers with our next mail-out. If you're not a subscriber, that's a good prompt to go and become one if you want to get that paper. Otherwise, it'll be on our website. The other thing is just a little advert for some support for the Clearinghouse. Like everybody else around here, we're being reviewed. So there's a survey at the back of the hall. If you can fill in the survey, it'll really help us to ensure that we continue beyond the end of the year, which would, I think, be quite a good thing. So I'd be really grateful if some of you would fill in that survey, because our review is happening as we speak. But I'd like to ask you to thank Betsy for a really remarkable morning, and having intruded on her holiday, I think we are all extremely grateful. So I'm delighted I managed to persuade you. So thank you, Betsy. Thank you very much. Thank you.